Okay, this is the follow-up video to the Guess the Method trick number 2. And at the time of this recording, which is actually pretty soon after it posted, one of you just about nailed it. You have almost all of the components in there in your observations. And I'll just say, if you observed this on the first watch initially, then you must be a master of observation, because this is not something that probably would be seen right away or even remotely thought about on first viewing. It would probably be seen maybe on a couple viewings after that as you're trying to sort out what went into this. But this would be a pretty good magician fooler. And the reason being that it has a high level of risk in it. Higher than what you probably would normally do on a trick, but I think that most of that risk can be managed to the point where you almost reduce it to zero, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So in general, if we just look at the face of the trick, how it was presented, this is a normal deck of cards starting out, and this is what the presentation appears to be. So the presentation appears to be a deck of cards that is thoroughly mixed. As I'm talking about what we're going to do, it's given a shuffle in front of the, right in front of the spectator, and then a selection is made, spread out, and there what appears to be a free selection of any card. That's what's stated. A card is taken, the card is viewed, and then the deck is shuffled. A couple times I think I did. I don't remember what I did. But the deck is shuffled, and then the card is replaced anywhere that the spectator chooses. And then the cards are turned over to be shuffled by the spectator. And then the card is found at the end. So all of those components are essential to the presentation of the trick. Let me talk about why very quickly before we look at the method. I know it might be killing some of you if you didn't catch on to the comments there. But the first thing is that the deck is shown. And there's a few observations that should be able to be made when the deck is shown for a magician. A magician would automatically be thinking about stacks. So certain stack orders to the deck. So you have the mnemonic stack or the Stebbins stack or some other kind of mathematical stack. And that is thrown away immediately just by showing the deck. And I decided that I was going to take the time to show the faces for that reason, so I could just kind of wash that away. Now, there are some observations to make in the deck that I'll show you in a minute, and the one that I used in the trick. But that was supposed to dispel that. Now, to follow that up, I also gave it a shuffle for the same reason, and I showed that it was a fair shuffle. That is also in there to dispel the idea that there was a stack being used, because if there's a stack and there's a table riffle shuffle, rather than like a pharaoh shuffle, then it becomes even less likely that a stack could be used. Now, an overhand shuffle might retain certain aspects of a stack, which could still be used, but the fact that it was a table riffle shuffle should have kind of blown that out of your mind. And then there is the first lie. I did tell one lie, and there's a little bit of a move going on here, and again, we'll talk about the reasons for that in a moment. I said that you could select any card that you wanted, and the way I spread them out looked a little bit like this. So I put low pressure at the beginning, high pressure in the middle, low pressure at the end, and then I selected from the center. Now, if I was really doing this for a magician, first of all, I would be pretty selective on the magician that I would use, and I would control this probably a little bit more by doing a fan like this in the hand. So I would do a hand spread, and I would force them towards the middle of the deck, outside of the outer ends or the outer quarters or so. Now, there's a lot of cards that could be chosen from, so there is quite a bit of flexibility there in the choice. But there is a bit of risk that if they chose something from the outside edges, with the way this is set, there is a setup, then the trick would have to be converted into something else. I would have to do something different. Either I would have to peek or I would have to present it a different way. I would have to go to some kind of a key card. I could continue the trick, but if there was too much of a risk that the card was not being selected from the place where it needed to be, in the center, I would have had to change the method. Now, that being said, with control, with spectator control and presentation control, there's really no reason why you shouldn't be able to reduce the risk down to almost zero. Again, we'll talk about why in a moment. But that is the one kind of fib that I told you there, that you could select any card. Really, you couldn't. You had to go from a wide margin in the center. And then after that, the card is taken, and it's given another couple of shuffles. And the reason why I did the shuffles was to demonstrate, and that's without looking at the faces, was to demonstrate that there could not possibly be a stack. That if there was a stack and the deck was shuffled again a couple times on the table riffles, that the card couldn't be returned in such a way that it would be noticed out of place in the stack, or that a stack could have been maintained. So that was a reason for those table shuffles, was to kind of wipe out that possibility in your mind. The card was returned, and then without looking at the faces, I said that I could hand the cards over for the spectator to shuffle. That is true. That's a true statement. I would do that. And here are the types of shuffles that a spectator could do. A spectator could do an overhand shuffle, or you'd have to pay close attention. A spectator could do a table shuffle if they do it this way. So one side to the other riffled and then pushed together. Or they could do an in the hands riffle shuffle if they do it this way. Part the halves and then shuffle them together. This would not work, and this is going to start to show the method here. This would not work if the spectator did something like this. Okay, flipping one end for the other would completely destroy the trick. Now, this brings me to a point. You could do this, but if you got to this point in the trick and something like that happened, you'd have to be observant, be paying attention. If something like that happened, you would need to convert and get yourself out. You'd have to do something else. So probably what you would do is you would look through the deck, and you would not be able to find the card. You wouldn't be able to tell what it was if that kind of thing happened. And then you would say, I don't know what it is, and then you'd use some other kind of reveal. You might have them tell you what the card is, and then you can use some other kind of revelation method or prediction that gives you a lot of flexibility. One that I'd recommend, you might be aware of, and you can look this up, is one called the Colossal Killer. Colossal Killer is a prediction and wallet kind of effect, where you take out a card that's inside of your wallet. It's got a lot of flexibility to it, and even a little bit of humor in the way that it can be displayed. It has a few outs itself. So you might want to always walk around with something like that to get yourself out of a bind in this sort of situation. Or you could do anything else with it if you have your own suggestion for an out. And we might actually spend a time here in the future talking about outs and alternatives when things don't go well. But that is probably what you would have to do at that point. So let's talk about what's actually happening here. I've already given up a little bit of it. The first thing I want to talk about is back design. And we'll continue our discussion here in a moment, talking about the design on the back. A little bit of a discussion to have there about that. Okay, so the first topic of discussion here are the use of what we call asymmetrical cards. Now, there are asymmetrical cards that have a back design that is what we call asymmetrical, meaning that one end is different from the other end. It has a pattern or a design on it that is a picture that really is only viewed in one way. And if you view it in another way, maybe turned over, it's a totally different image, because whatever is on one end of the deck is not the same thing on the other. So this would be kind of novelty cards that have a photograph. It could be corporate cards that have a logo on it, and it's only spelled one way and it's not duplicated on the other side. There are even some designer cards out there that are asymmetrical, meaning that they have some kind of a abstract design on them that is asymmetrical and does not repeat itself. These all are symmetrical back designs. I don't think I own any asymmetrical cards. I usually buy kind of stock factory style basic cards. So B cards, which are the ones that we use, we'll look at this in a minute, has a symmetrical design to it, meaning that the pattern is the same no matter how you look at it. This deck here, this is an Arco deck, same kind of thing. It's got a very pretty kind of design, but it is symmetrical. You can cut it in half, and the one half mirrors the other. And of course, bicycle cards are also symmetrical. You can alter these to make them asymmetrical. If you wanted to mark them in some way, you could put a dot in one place and make them asymmetrical that only you would notice. I did not mark the cards. I used a straight, legit B deck with no markings on it at all. You could do this trick not only with asymmetrical markings on the back, but you actually could do an asymmetrical marking on the front if you wanted to hide your markings a little bit more and do asymmetrical deck tricks if you wanted to. There's kind of a whole category of those kinds of tricks where cards are discovered or identified because of the asymmetry in them and the way that they're positioned in the deck. I did not do any markings. Everything was completely on the up and up. However, there was a bit of preparation involved in there, and we'll talk about that here in the next segment. Okay, so I have the performance deck here divided into two parts. And you can see that the parts are not exactly the same. One side is a little bit smaller than the other, and this kind of demonstrates what the risk would be if you were to spread out a thoroughly shuffled deck. You would have about 2 in 5 chances that this grouping of cards would be selected over that one. Now, those are not very good odds. Those are pretty poor odds, but again, we're going to try to increase that and make it a lot more beneficial to you via your performance. So let's look at what the difference is here. So the one side here has a certain type of card, and the other side has kind of the opposite. The cards on the left are symmetrical. Okay, so these are all of these symmetrical face cards in the deck. Now that involves almost all of the diamonds. So nearly all of the diamond suited cards are symmetrical, with the exception of the 7. The 7 of diamonds is actually an asymmetrical card. All of the clubs, spades, and hearts that are ace, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So it's not merely odd. One of you pointed out that you noticed a chunk of odd cards. That was just a tip-off to you, but that is not quite authentic. It just so happened to be that as you were looking at the deck when I spread it, that there must have been a grouping of the odd ones together, which kind of tipped that off to you. There are even numbers in there too, which are symmetrical cards, or rather asymmetrical cards. And so let me explain how this works. These cards are all facing one way. They're all facing kind of the same way in terms of their symmetry. So if you look at this one, most of the hearts, including the center heart, is facing upright. And you can say the same of the clubs. So the 9s, you would note if 5 out of the 9 are facing in the same direction, and they're facing upright. That would be an upright setting for that asymmetrical card. The 6s are very similar. You'd have 4 out of 6 facing upright. So the top 4 should be facing upright. You can see that with the heart and the spade here. The 5s, 3 out of 5 would be facing one way. So the clubs you can see is facing upright, same with the heart. The 7, 5 out of 7 would be facing one way. And in the case of the 7 of diamonds, which is a diamond, and the diamond is a symmetrical figure, but because there's an asymmetrical number, and it's odd on one side, you could also include that facing up one way. So those are the 7s, 5 facing up one way. The 5s, again, we already talked about that. Now the 8s also are symmetrical because 5 out of the 8 are facing one way, 3 are facing the other. So this is an upright variation of it with all 5. The aces are easily understood as symmetrical, except for the ace of diamonds, because there's only one figure there, and it's either right side up or upside down. 3s have 2 out of 3 facing upright. We already talked about the 8s. and aces, and I think we hit everything here. So these are all of the symmetrical cards. The 9, I think we talked about it, but again, you have 5 out of the 9 facing one way. So these are all of these symmetrical cards, and essentially we want the spectator to pick one of these. Now, again, it's only 2 and 5 that any one of these would be picked, so we want to try to improve the odds a little bit. Now, the way I had it situated at the time of selection was that the symmetrical cards were precisely in the middle of the deck. Now, I toyed around with the idea of just doing this, but I wanted to try to disguise that setup a little bit. And the way I did it was I had it set up a little bit mixed up at the beginning. And again, one of you caught this right away. You figured it out. And because you noticed that one discrepancy, you reasoned that the shuffle that followed was part of it. And you were dead on. You figured it out. What I wanted to do is I wanted to be able to spread the deck and have hopefully the discrepancy not noticed, even though it was caught out there in some aspect with the odd cards. And the way I did that is I took each of these 2 halves, which are all symmetrical cards, and I cut them in half again. So I have my 2 groupings, my 2 sides of symmetrical cards, and then in the midst of that, I put half of my asymmetrical cards. So I have an asymmetrical group there and an asymmetrical group here, sandwiched between symmetrical groupings, so that they, in their halves, are in the middle. So the top half has symmetrical cards, asymmetrical cards, symmetrical cards. Over here is the same thing. Now then, the next thing I did is I used my ever-trusty breather crimp. I actually put a specific kind of breather in this that would come out very easily with a shuffle. But I made a Queen of Hearts breather crimp, and then I placed the queen in the middle so that I would be able to break to that. Now, I could just estimate that. I probably didn't need to do that, but I wanted to give myself every benefit of the doubt that I was cutting this exactly in half and that I wouldn't offset. Because I am going to hurt my odds a little bit here, even though I'm going to help them in a way. This is an additional risk I took just for you. So anyway, this is the setup. So what I can do now is I can spread and show them at the beginning, and it looks like a mixed pack. Now, what someone noted was that there was a section, like right over here, where they caught onto a grouping of odd cards, and you can see how this would happen. So I have 5s and 7s all together, and it just, because the number of cards, the types of cards that can be in that grouping are smaller, you have an increased likelihood. Now, if you really wanted to set this up, you could go in there and try to mix in some 6s with that and some 8s to try to hide that a little bit better, to hide it. But anyway, I gave a spread, and this looks a little bit more mixed than what it's going to in a moment. And then what I did is I closed it up, and I didn't show it to you after this moment. I cut at my breather, and then I did as even a riffle shuffle as I could, but I didn't really worry about it being perfect. It's not a Pharaoh shuffle. It's just an even, as a relatively even riffle shuffle. And now if we spread, we'll see that we're going to have our grouping pretty well chunked here in the middle of asymmetrical cards to choose from. So that's how it's set up. Now again, they're all facing one way. They're all facing in the same asymmetrical direction, so that if I look at it, I can call one side up and one side down. So if I reversed one, I'd be able to identify it. So at the onset, I already know that they're going to pick an ace, a 3, a 5, a 6, 7, 8, or a 9. And no diamonds except for the 7 of diamonds. So all those ones that I didn't name are cards I can ignore completely as I look through the deck here in a moment. Okay, so the deck was then fanned out, spread out, or it could be fanned out in front if you wanted to do kind of a classic force sort of presentation where you narrow them down to a particular place. Again, it's a classic force only in basic theory because it's a huge chunk. Again, the way I presented this on the video was that I had light pressure here, then deep pressure, and then light pressure on the end, so that I had those cards took up the bulk of the space were in the middle there. They would take one of those cards and take it out. Now, you have to be observant and make sure that they are looking at it like this. So they're taking it out and rotating it up. You want to pay attention. If they turn it upside down, then you don't want to turn the deck. If they hold it in the same place upright the whole time, then you're good to go. You might even want to take control by saying, go ahead and point to any card, and then take it out yourself and show it to them if you want to have a little bit more control, but you could do that. So in this case, the card is the 3 of spades. So they would look at that. Now, while they're looking, and what I did on the video, is I took the deck and I gave it another few shuffles, and this didn't matter. At this point, I can actually shuffle up all the cards. They don't have to be together. In fact, it's better if they're not for the end, if you wanted to have them inspect the deck. But whenever I brought the deck back out for the spread, I turned it around. So it also gives me the ability to rotate it. So there's the rotated deck. They can stick it in literally anywhere they want to. And now this 3 of spades, you'll see in a moment, is going to be upside down compared to the others. Now, shuffling. They can shuffle as long as they are shuffling overhand or as long as they are splitting and keeping the halves unrotated. Again, if they rotate the halves, and they can shuffle as much as they want, but if they rotate the halves, one half to the other, then the trick is really destroyed. You really can't go on with it. So after that, you just have the reveal, and the location is pretty simple. You're going to look through the deck, and you're going to ignore all of the face cards and anything that's a 10 and above, and all of the diamonds except for the 7. And all the rest of them are going to be symmetrical, or rather asymmetrical. So I can see that right now my 5 of hearts is upside down. Now I haven't seen a card here to reference that against. But once I see my ace, I can see that both of these are upside down. I'm looking for a right side up card. So at this point, I'm just looking through to see if I can locate an asymmetrical card that is right side up. And as I look through, I'll see that all of these cards are upside down except for the 3 of spades. I can see that I have 2 spades there. So what I did is once I saw it, I just kept going to take my time as if it really mattered, and that there wasn't some kind of special marking on it that I'm looking for. And then I went back on a second pass and I said, I think I'm going to settle on one over here that I found. I'm going to go with that one. And then at that point, what I did is I spread them out so you could see. Now, you can't see the symmetry of the cards just by looking at the indices. So that was a pretty safe spread for the camera. If you were doing this for magicians and you really wanted to kind of cover your tracks, what you would want to do is you would want to give it a shuffle with opposing halves, and you could kind of destroy the evidence that way. But that's the trick. So asymmetry, using asymmetrical cards as a block or a grouping to identify a selected card. That's my idea right there. Now, a couple things about doing this with markings. One person right away put marked deck. You could just do a marked deck and do this trick. That would be one thing to do. But if you were fooling magicians, you would want to avoid that kind of situation. However, you could, if you wanted to, if you don't like reading markings on a deck for identification of a card, and you wanted to make yourself an asymmetrical marked deck, there's a couple ways to do that. We'll talk about that here in a moment. So asymmetrical markings, if you wanted to go this route, you could make a marked deck that has asymmetrical markings only, just for the purpose of doing asymmetrical tricks. And if you did that, you wouldn't have to have, you would increase your odds dramatically. You would have 100% odds that you would have a selected card that you could use. It would be much better than what I presented here. You probably wouldn't fool magicians, though, because if they went to examine them, they'll probably find your markings. Here's what I would do. First of all, if I had one of these cards, that's not a good one, that's a symmetrical one. If I had a card like the 5 of diamonds here, which is symmetrical, what I would do is I would put an etching on there that would take the symmetry away. So I might take a pin and I might put a scratch through the digit up here. So I might take all of my diamond cards and put one scratch on one corner and call that up. So just a light scratch, a fine white line scratch in there on the digit, on the numeral there, so that I would be able to identify the upside from the downside. So I would only do that on the upside. I would leave the downside alone. It's something that I would be able to see easily. For the face cards, you could do a similar thing. You could etch out a part of the letter, or you could put an etching like on the club through the tail there so that you could see a little bit of etching. Another way to do it is to take either a red, black, blue, or yellow permanent marker, a Sharpie, and just put an extra marking somewhere on here that you would know. So queens would all have the same marking in the same place. You would just fill in something, maybe a dot or a line or something like that, that you would be able to identify an up versus a downside on all of them. So that would be a way to make a symmetrical deck based on all of the faces, and you could mark up only the cards that need to have that marking. And then you would have a symmetrical deck, an asymmetrical deck with symmetrical backs on them, and you could do all those tricks. So that's just one idea for you. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope you find applications for this idea and this concept and some other illusions, some other tricks in your own repertoire. So good luck with this, and happy magicking.